Welcome back to the live stream. Today I'm going to be reacting to Playing with Fire. It's a documentary from the Mises Institute, Austrian Economics, talking about fractional reserve banking. Could have this been a response to the MMT documentary, Finding the Money? I don't know. It's kind of suspicious. This one's going to be fun for me. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
Hello, everybody. Rolling into the chat. How are you doing today? It's good to see that we're all doing okay. I'm going to react to a video today. It's called Playing with Fire. It's by the Mises Institute. So it's Austrian Economics. It's about fractional reserve banking. And like I said in the intro, it came suspiciously near the documentary by MMT called Finding the Money. I don't know, maybe 8 months later or so. I scanned through it when it first came out. I'm not much into the zeitgeist movies anymore about fractional reserve banking. It's kind of a dead horse at this point. But I thought, you know what? It would be a good one for me to actually sit through and watch. There's this American guy, and he reacts to Canadians, and he talks like this. Hi, I'm just a typical average American here to react and learn about Canada. Well, in this case, I'm going to do it about fractional reserve banking and from the perspective of Austrian economics and a little more of a subset than that from the Mises Institute. So I think I'll roll into this. This is about a 35-minute, exercise about to happen here. So I think I'll just start rolling into it. If you have questions or comments about the documentary, put them in the live chat. I will be interested to hear them, read to them as well, and react and learn. Here we go.
The Fed has made the economy more unstable than it was before the Fed.
They, the keeper of the keys of the magic kingdom of money, would rather you didn't understand.
They would like to be thought of as the problem solver that shows up and puts out the fire. But in fact, they're really the arsonist that started the fire to begin with.
For over a century, the United States financial leadership, guided by its central bank, the Federal Reserve, has acquired immense control over the economy. Yet the Fed's dominant role on the global economic stage and its impact on everyday Americans often goes unexamined. It's time to look behind the curtain at this pivotal institution to see how it works, how its decisions have affected our lives, and if we need a Fed to secure our financial future. Before we can dive into a deeper analysis of the Fed, there are several fundamental concepts and historical events which are important to understand.
We're going to get into the fundamental concepts of understanding fractional reserve banking. Again, the epic music in this stuff. If I'm ever going to put out a documentary, it's going to have music like this. This is the way to go.
Understand. The first of which is, what is money?
So economists look on money as
how you doing,
a general
Tony?
Medium of exchange. That is that everyone sells the things that they produce, or they sell their services for something that everyone else will accept.
For thousands of years, human civilization settled on gold and silver as the main sources of money.
And in modern society, everyone accepts money. But it's also a common unit of account. And what we mean by that is that it's a pricing unit. So everyone prices their goods and services that they desire to sell in terms of money, which makes it easy for people to compare the prices of different goods.
So where do banks fit in?
People observed that it was cumbersome to carry these around, so bankers came into existence, and bankers would issue a piece of paper that said it's a claim on gold. Whoops, that's your monetary original sin right there.
When banks were invented, they're basically warehouses of gold, or whatever gold that you had, you would be given a certificate that you could use to redeem the gold, and whenever you wanted it back.
Money's a commodity, like any other commodity, and it has a supply and demand. In the United States, that's the good old dollar bill. Also, checking deposits, which are claims to dollar bills held by banks. Well, the role is to make it easy for people to exchange.
How do banks make a profit? With fractional reserve banking, it involves creating new money out of thin air, but it comes with risks.
Fractional reserve banking is just the idea that
Thin air theory. George Selgin and I were again going at it yesterday about thin air theory. Really, what they're referring to is endogenous money. They use it as a derogatory term against, a well-proven theory. It's kind of funny. If you read George Selgin's paper, you'll see like every paragraph starts with thin air theory or thin air theorists. And it's appropriate to say that. In the sense that, banks can conjure up an asset, a loan asset, and conjure up the liability, which is the deposits at the same time in the same operation. But it's important to provide nuance with that, and you can kind of see that in the endogenous money theory realm. Steve likes to call it bank-originated money and debt.
banks keep a fraction of deposits in reserve. So like somebody walks in and makes a deposit. What they actually do is they take that money and they use it to finance loans that they make to other people, business loans,
49ers fan.
that sort of thing.
Let's say they can lend
I
out
used to be a
90%, but they're
49ers
comfortable
fan
with
back in the
keeping
'90s.
$1 for every $10 that people will deposit. So you can write checks up to $1,000 on that checking deposit, but at the same time, there's $900 more in circulation than there was before you made that deposit. So in that case, they immediately create money.
They're going to the fractional reserve myth already. I'm hoping they'll clarify this. There's no prescribed ratio that banks keep on reserve in order to make loans. Banks make loans based on profitability outcomes, creditworthiness of customers. They'll always find the reserves after if they need to settle in that manner. Settling, of course, is settling between banks, right? You may hold an account with a specific bank, get a loan, but you might be buying, let's say, a car from a car dealership with a different bank. And in that case, they don't have an account there at that bank, your bank. So your bank needs to settle overnight with the car dealership's bank.
That new money can then be loaned out by the originating bank and deposited into another bank, which can then loan out a portion of those deposits.
It means that enough depositors could come to the bank requesting the money. The bank would come up dry. They wouldn't have all the money there because they'd use the money.
Jonathan here, Beardo, as I like to call him, he still thinks that people are going into banks and withdrawing cash balances now. That doesn't happen anymore. What we do have is what's called silent runs, and we saw that with the bank in California 2 years ago, Silicon Valley Bank. And so there are electronic withdrawals. And the reality is now, if it's all electronic, either the Fed can just step in and provide the liquidity to make sure settlements happen. So when people are withdrawing their money digitally from the bank and going to another bank, there's the easy settlement funds available. And of course, you've got the FIDC, I believe it's called, down in the United States. They'll cover those settlement balances as well. But nobody's coming out with wheelbarrows full of cash anymore, Jonathan.
Use the money to finance those loans.
Now, you may be asking yourself, where does the government fit into all this?
So if we look around the world, we find almost every country has a central bank because central banks are really handy in creating.
So that guy, Pollock, I put his name in the description. And YouTube, when in my editor, said it was a controversial word. So I just took his name out. I just thought that's a funny little tidbit for you. And also make sure, do this. Make sure you're hitting that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave comments after the video. That's always important. I looked at my notification bell statistics. 5% of you hit the notification bell, and only 2% of you actually have notifications set up on your mobile devices, so you actually see the notification, right? You don't have that notification set up on the device itself, even though you've hit the notification bell. Very important little feature.
In creating the Bank of France, Napoleon said, I want a bank that'll always lend me money. And that's what all governments want. Spend more money than they have.
That's the way they get reelected. If it's financed by taxation, people immediately realize that it's coming out of their own pockets.
And the way it works in politics is the politicians love the Fed because it creates what economists call a fiscal illusion, the sort of the promise of something for nothing.
If everything is guided by all
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think that's a little fallacious. What I would say, though, it does create a degree of political separation. So it's perfect for politicians, because if rates are going up, if that's a tool you want to use in the economy, politicians, like we're seeing now, Trump, you can just blame the Fed, right? So it's provided that shield for politicians. I would go that far.
of this money printing, and no bank is overextending itself. The whole system is working together and not expanding. That way the whole system is sort of a cartel.
In other words, all the banks inflate together because they're all under the umbrella now of the Fed.
Prior to the creation of the Fed, people were using gold as money, and the gold standard was a constraint on government spending.
People will say the dollar was backed by gold. No, it was defined as gold. Very important distinction. It was defined as a weight of gold, and it was codified in 1900. Gold Standard Act in 1900. People walked around with $20 gold pieces in their pants pocket. You know, gold was a...
Yeah, well, now we walk around with, 5 kilo or 5, milligram phones in our pockets. Nobody's going to be carrying, 20 pounds of gold in their pocket anymore.
It was a functional currency.
You weren't going to experience financial disaster if that's what the system was about. And importantly, it restrained the ability of government to do what governments now do, is just spend like Santa Claus.
And so in the beginning, that system seemed to work.
If the gold standard worked, why did the government create the central bank we now know as the Federal Reserve? Responding to the pressures of special interests that rose out of the Progressive era, and after years of regional and local banks failing due to fractional reserve banking, in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed by the U.S. Congress and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson.
The Fed came into being.
Well, they kind of highlight it, the last panic in 1907, the Panic of 1907 really was the catalyst for the third central bank in the United States of America, which we know as the Federal Reserve. So they did kind of mention that there was a lot of instability in banking, and hence we created a central monetary authority to try to quell some of that instability. So they're truthful there.
With every legislative promise that the gold standard would remain.
Fed was only supposed to be a lender of last resort. It was only to prevent mass bank failures.
And the goal was to stabilize the banking system, stabilize all the booms and busts that they were seeing.
The Act created 12 regional Federal Reserve banks to serve distinct geographic areas of the United States. It required every national bank to become a member and hold stock in their respective regional Federal Reserve Bank.
Each Federal Reserve Bank is a corporation.
Every bank in the district must subscribe to shares in the respective reserve banks in proportion to the capital of that private bank.
Federal Reserve banks are banks. They have balance sheets, they have loans, they have investments, they have deposits, they have borrowed funds, they have capital. It's like a bank.
To manage the system, the Act established a 7-member Federal Reserve Board, now known as the Board of Governors.
Wouldn't cause a financial disaster. It's the opposite. If we don't mine enough gold, good, and services can't move. Terrible system. Yeah, I've always said, why would you tie something that is has no relation to total economic activity to something that could be found or could not be found on any given day of the year or any quarter? It is a rather stupid system, I agree, Frank.
Now known as the Board of Governors. The supposed intent.
Hence why we've opted for an elastic money supply that can expand and shrink with economic demand. No system's perfect, of course, right? And there's flaws in banking and especially commercial banking. And that's the whole point. Is to have a strong monetary authority to constrain that, right? So our the consensus has been and still is, by the minority of people that a central bank is better at managing the supply of money than, finding rocks in the ground at random.
The supposed intent was to provide stability, banking expertise, and a diverse range of perspectives.
When the Fed was created, the Secretary
How you doing, Frank?
was
Doing
William
okay?
Gibbs McAdoo, and he gave a great speech at the time in which he said, "Now that we have the Fed, financial booms and busts have ended. The Fed has made all of this only in the past, and we're entering a new world where this won't happen."
And then the crash happens and they find out they lost their job, they lost their business.
This music's great.
In 1933, Congress passed a new banking act, supposedly to restore confidence. This act set the stage for the ever-changing evolution and increasing power of the Fed. It created the Federal Open Market Committee to manage the Fed's open market operations and formulate monetary policy.
So the Federal Open Market Committee, which consists of all the governors and a selection of the reserve banks, of these dozen outposts, makes interest rate policy.
And that those basically involved buying or selling short-term government securities.
The president appoints the chairman of the Fed. Well, it's kind of like rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. You could call this institution the Fed, or you could call it the government money printing apparatus, but it would create all the same problems.
I think now that boom and bust is the wrong figure of speech. I think that we should use fires and fire departments putting them out. And the Fed serves a dual purpose. It is both the arsonist and the fireman.
The Austrian business cycle theory
Jesus.
says that credit expansion leads to economy-wide distortions. This means resources are misdirected toward unsustainable projects. This creates a boom and bust cycle, or an unsustainable economic expansion built on.
So I've done a lot of, obviously, most people know that I'm a modeler. And Austrian business cycle is actually very much an endogenous process if you model the whole system, including central banking, right? So interest rates adjust depending on economic activity. And economic activity, the business cycle, is dependent on the distribution of income by the GDP. So essentially, at the very core is a class struggle between workers and capitalists, right? You can look at the Goodwin growth cycle model, and you could build that model out into thousands of equations. But if you just simplify it, right, you see that cycle. So as wages go up, profits go down. There's less investment into new real capital. There's less output. Then employment goes down. Wages subside. Profits then go up because the cost of wages have gone down. There's more investment, and the cycle does that over and over. And that's a very simplified view of the economy. And within that, you have the central bank authority and commercial banks marking up and down the interest rate policy. So the Fed sets a floor policy rate, and commercial banks in aggregate are ultimately reacting to inflationary pressure. So they always want to beat inflation, so they'll react to inflation. Inflation, or CPI, right? The change in CPI is based on economic activity.
Expansion built on misdirected resources is followed by a sharp decline.
The Fed came into business. Before you knew it, it was doing the government's work of inflating the currency.
When someone is manipulating the unit that.
Yeah, so it comes down, Frank, to distributional issues of money, essentially what it's used for and what hands it ends up into, right? And there are healthy, if we believe in capitalism, which I know some of my viewers do not, but if you believe that that's probably the best system we have for now, so long as it's in a strong democracy, which I know that's problematic in itself. There is a healthy circulation of, income shareholders through the business cycle, and that changes, right? And it's a dynamic system. But I agree. It does matter what it's issued for. Like, so government spending, how is it issued? Where does it go? Who gets it first, essentially? Does it go directly to households? How does that influence profits? Does it go directly to firms? Obviously, that's a great benefit for firms right away. Is it one and the same? What are the lags in the system? And of course, those lags create feedbacks. So it's very much, I would say, a distributional issue
that we're all using, that's going to have adverse consequences.
The Fed actually intends to cheapen the value of your money by 2% a year. It's kind of this monetary shoplifting, skimming 2% off the top of whatever you think you earned.
We still have financial crises. We still have booms and busts.
This is the government getting into the act.
And get into the act they did in a big way.
I have directed Secretary Connolly to...
Bought treasuries, eh? Can't really do that in day trading. I don't see enough. There are days where there's some volatility on Fed news announcements, but like just, scalping the market, I can't really trade treasuries. I find it's just not my style. So I'm stuck with equities. But I thought about like in my like developing a really good swing trading program for myself. So for anybody that's watching, swing trading is more of a medium-term trade, 6 months, right? And you're kind of going with the whole swing of a specific security or equity and going through its cycle. I thought about it. So maybe one day I'll be investing in treasuries too. What is Tony? Tony, Engineering 101. Any dynamic system, brackets, simple of complex, will have a series of natural frequencies. Yes, I agree. And it gets really great when you start mixing those amplitudes and frequencies together in different system states. And you get some real non-linear dynamics that just tickles the soul if you're into that kind of stuff.
Suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
So in 71, they might have done other things like raise the price of gold, say, well, dollars are worth less, but instead they just said, no, we're not paying, so tough luck. But it was tough luck for the world because that allowed, in a pure paper money world, that is to
there's not many live viewers right now, but make sure you do say hi if you are watching either on X, formerly known as Twitter, or YouTube. But really, this could be a question for the comments. Do you think the gold standard had the effect, which they're going to describe here as being detrimental to the economy? Did it change the economy in any sense, or was it just a removal of a constraint that wasn't necessary? And despite, what we all think of Nixon, maybe he did a good thing after all. I don't know. Leave your comments, thoughts, or say it in the chat.
A currency which has no intrinsic value could be created with no link to gold or other precious metals in peacetime.
It's all fiat currency. It's all just paper.
What is fiat money? Fiat money is the opposite of the inherently valuable gold coin. And thereafter, from that day to this, the dollar has owed its value to habit, to confidence in this great country.
This shift to a fiat currency created dramatic economic uncertainty as foreign exchange markets became volatile. Prices.
Yeah. And you know what? I'll agree. And that's a true statement. I wasn't alive at the time. I was born in 83. But anything can cause, market fluctuations, any news, right? But it generally, and I've often related this, to treasury yields, which Frank is talking about, even like long treasury yields. And we see divergences from the short end, but really the short end is an anchor for long end yields, right? plus a risk premium. So because it's a longer duration, the yield's going to be bigger. And sometimes it does, increase more. The yield will grow versus the short end yield, but that's based on market news. But as soon as that news disappears and subsides, it returns to its a natural anchor plus that premium. And those dynamics are fascinating because the news cycle has changed so much since the 70s. So maybe this story persisted longer in the 1970s because we didn't have the 24-hour news cycle, whereas now we've got a new story every day influencing markets, right? And that's a big factor. But you can look, when you do aggregate modeling, right, you can find that there are attractors in the systems, and they can be strange attractors, so they become repellers at some point. Tony, you would know this sort of stuff. And so in that sense, there is an underlying return to trend. I don't like using that because it sounds very linear. If you looked at like the Lorenz equation, right? You have three equilibria, and they're strange attractors, right? And they're both attracted and repelled at the same time, right? That's the kind of return to trend I'm talking about.
Prices ballooned. Higher costs led to job losses. The combination gave us a new financial term, stagflation, and that became a defining feature of the decade.
Yeah, but if I agree with Mark, it wouldn't make much of a fun show. I mean, agreeing with them for an hour. That's the problem with doing, people that I like, right? And generally reacting. The whole name of this series is reacting to the worst economic takes online. So I just don't know. Maybe I could try one that we're all in favor. The one thing, Tony, is I'm always worried about the echo chamber, right? One side or the other. And I've always tried to be friendly to things like Austrian economics, not so much neoclassical economics, because I think if there's some sort of bridge or communication between different echo chambers, different, theories of thought, we can come to some sort of consensus, even though they'll probably be, there'll be downfalls to that, right? Compromises to those consensus. I think it's important that we show opposing views as well. And critique them where critique is necessary, and then follow up by providing an alternative view to counter it. So critique without an alternative is insanity, and an alternative without actually looking at the solutions in front of you that are already being used is also insanity. So that's why I steer away from things that I agree with, because I did that years ago. I agreed with them. I endorsed them, right? So it's tough for me to do that.
The middle of that, as a result of the 1970s inflation, then under Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve forced up.
Well, I could do it, but 3-minute video is not going to make a very long reaction live stream.
In the 1980s, these interest rates and a weak economy made it more difficult for governments and banks to repay their debts, contributing to the savings and loan crisis and the debt crisis in Latin America.
And when that great inflation finally stopped in the 80s, we had a lot.
Being influenced here. I'm being bullied. Into Mark Blythe. I like Mark Blythe. Okay, so actually he got in trouble about 1.5 years ago at an MMT conference because he was quite contrary to a lot of the leading speakers at this conference. It was in Scotland, and there was a bit of an outcry from the MMTers. And Steve Keenan and I were on Mark's side, obviously, for the simple fact you have to use your brain and even challenge your own side. And I've always gotten in trouble with the MMTers for challenging their views. So, no, I agree with you guys. And, Frank, you're kind of saying it right there. There are maybe things that I wouldn't agree with Mark on. And maybe that is a good exercise to go down that road, considering we're probably, 99% of the things we do agree on. So maybe we'll see if this 3-minute video holds. Like, if I can find it, maybe Tony send me the link.
Markets which had come to rely on the inflation of asset prices and on the printing of money.
Why would the Fed want to use inflation to create winners and losers?
The reason is somebody profits from it, and if somebody's profiting from it, somebody else is losing by it.
And it's a really good example of what the Fed does in a general sense, which is they create winners and losers. It means that the Fed has fundamentally altered the makeup of the economy.
The Fed creates inflation, and it does so not just because it wants to
Cost plus markups create inflation. These guys are so hardened in their century-old theory that they're all they're doing is promoting the ghost of Milton Friedman at this point. And these are all fallacious arguments about what the Fed is causing, what it's not causing, because they don't believe in empirics. They don't really have anything to back this up other than rhetoric at this point, unless they provide something, which it might.
want to see prices rise. Because if all prices rose, there'd be no reason for inflation. But in the real world, when money's injected into the economy, some people get it first.
So as soon as you take on this ability to bail out some people, it means that you are saying you get to be the winner, and everybody else who doesn't get bailed out, they get to be the losers.
So who are the winners?
It's so they're probably driving at the bailouts of reserve money to banks, which is just settlement accounts, right? It's really just what the banks use to settle between each other from private sector economic activity. The central bank is an authority over commercial banks, so it's going to fund their operations essentially with reserve accounts. This is a job of the federal government to decide the winners and losers, right? So I disagree fundamentally with what they're saying right there.
Winners.
They're not elected officials. To some extent, they're doing the bidding of elected officials, Fed bureaucrats, but they're rearranging our lives by messing with the money.
The government is always the winner, because when the Fed is printing up new money, it means that the government can benefit. It means that the government they're the first spender of the brand new money.
So large corporations, not small corporations, large banks, not small banks. And then the political elites that sort of control the political system. The people who get the money first are also the same sort of people who have the most influence on the Fed itself.
Politicians can offer this program, that program to benefit everybody, and they don't have to raise taxes.
Now, who are the losers?
The average working American and their family unit is who really pays the price.
So statistically, since the growth of the financial sector, and this kind of ties back into my question about did the gold standard do anything? And there's some loose connection here. We saw the growth at that point on of the financial sector. And as we saw the share of income in the economy grow as opposed to GDP over time of the financial sector, we've seen a decline in the household sector share of income. And that's a lot more broader implication than just, do we have a monetary authority? What level of independence does it have? Et cetera, et cetera. It's actually a broad question of the financial sector. So financial businesses, right? And it's a tough noodle to crack because we all rely on the financial sector to provide us the ease of life we have, which of course is contrary to ecological economics. It's essentially, destroying the wealth of the planet. Well, at the same time, we have convenience. But that's an issue of the financial sector. And one of the failings we can say of the Federal Reserve and many central banks around the world as monetary authorities is they're not reining in the financial sector with healthy regulation, right? So we should always be promoting productive industries, right? And in this case, we want to include ecological economics. We want to promote productive, sustainable economic activity. And a lot of finance capital is fictitious, right? If we get into Marx, et cetera, et cetera. And we could say the Fed is not doing its job in that regard. And if that's one of their arguments, that's where I would agree.
During this cycle of boom and bust, that the Fed is supposedly saving us every time.
It's Econ 101. You can't get something from nothing. Physics 101 as well.
I didn't watch it actually yet, Tony. Is this the one where he's talking about the British guy? What's his name? Jeez, I forget his name. Gary Economics, whatever his last name is. I haven't watched it yet, so I guess I'll watch it before. I don't want to comment on something I haven't watched. On Steve Keen's last video yesterday, I explained what Elizabeth Warren was going after. It has zero effect on 97 to 98% of the population. I can show that Warren's tax would have brought in around 16 trillion over 8 years, 2016 to 2024. Over the same time, US debt has increased by 16 trillion. Where did that 16 trillion come from? Because you can't buy treasuries or bonds with credit, you have to have money. No, Ty, it's a 3-minute cartoon. I don't know. What are you talking about? The Mark Blythe video or Steve Keen's video? Yeah, Gary Stevenson. Thanks. That's his name.
And so what that means is it's the government taking, and it's the cost of that is going on to everybody else.
I have to record it and put it on the platform. I can't just play it from here for some reason.
Which has created more uncertainty.
Now, when they print up the money to pay for the loss, that's effectively a debt of the U.S. government.
So every time they tell us that they're solving a problem, what they're really doing is rescuing their own reputation from what they previously brought on.
Unless you're the Fed, you can't stay in business and do that.
When it
I disagree. Again, I've created many different models where you can isolate out, like perform little tests, and these are obviously classroom experiments, not the real world, where you remove the majority of monetary authority interference, and the business cycle will still happen. You'll still have endogenous effects of excessive private credit creation in the economy, causing instability. And so shockingly, when I talk to a lot of Austrians, they're actually quite favorable of Hyman Minsky, who's a post-Keynesian through and through. So that's interesting. They do acknowledge that commercial bank credit expansion to extreme degrees is problematic, but they are saying that is directly caused by the Fed targeting different rates, right? So lowering the rate would cause commercial bank expansion. But if you look at the studies and you look at the statistics yourself, you realize that banks aren't operating on, what's for banks creating loans. It's, for one, it's more profitable if interest rates are higher, right? Sometimes they'll have to go into the interbank market and find those funds to settle afterwards, but the margins get bigger, right? It becomes problematic for the loanees, right? The debtors that have to pay that. So it might increase the people going out for loans to a degree. You also have to realize the real economy behind it are the assets out there, the real consumption goods, the real capital goods out there to be consumed to justify the increasing production and causing that so-called boom. And like I said before, endogenously, there's many processes before the simple adjustment of a policy rate that causes the business cycle to swing up and down.
comes to the economy, it seems crises and the Fed go hand in hand.
The Fed has always used emergencies to expand their powers.
And so as we have more crises that are generated by the Fed and the banking system, it gives them a foundation for new interventions. It gives them a chance to grab more power.
In the wake of the crises of the late 20th century, after the country went off the gold standard, the financial sector exploded in size as the country shifted away from industrial production. The growing dominance of finance over other sectors of the economy became known as financialization.
So financialization is is the treatment of finance not as the means to an end, but as an end in itself.
It doesn't really produce anything by itself. It just helps us with financial matters, with investing, with raising capital, with allocating savings, those kind of things. So we're talking about stocks, bonds, banks, and so forth.
So you can see the financialization of the economy and how the finance, insurance, and real estate companies, that sector has exploded, especially since we went off the gold
Mr.
standard.
These
Jenkinson.
dominant Wall Street banks are now cartels, empowered in that regard by the Federal Reserve itself.
And in the new millennium, the Fed seemed to assume a more aggressive.
The Fed's been around since 1913, right? And we saw the growth of financialization in the 1970s. And there's arguments that growth may have been propelled by technology itself, right? The digital age, right? And the speed of communication. To just simply put everything, this is the Fed's fault. The Fed, remember, has been a constant, and their charter has changed. It's been augmented over time. But to just simply say, well, that's the Fed, that's the Fed, that's the Fed, right? It's the Fed's the very thing that is the constraint on the system, if you really think about it, right? Without it, there is no constraint on greed and excess by the financial sector, or we'd have to get the fiscal authority, the federal government, to step in and create regulations, which they should be doing to quell that. And Mr. Alex Jankerson, how you doing, buddy? Glad you could roll in. It's been a quiet chat today, so I'm glad you're here. Hope you're well.
Aggressive role.
The economists in the late 90s and early 2000s to begin to talk about the fact that we were in a great moderation.
But we found out that the great moderation really was the great leveraging up, the great inflation of money.
And so they use language like that, as do all government bureaucracies, to make things seem much more pleasant than they really are.
The Fed used the argument that, well, we have to make sure that unemployment stays low and that.
So they somewhat agree with the post-Keynesian, the Minskian view of the Great Moderation, but what the Minskian view is that this great leveraging up was by commercial bank credit, not Fed Reserve balances. And if you look at the data, Fed Reserve balances did not explode during the great period of great moderation. Bank credit definitely accelerated. We didn't see an explosion of commercial or reserve balances until the great financial crisis and programs like quantitative easing. Stefanizia 27. Stefanizia 27. Bring your pizza to me. Are you Italian?
Stays high, and that growth is going along at a good pace.
The Fed doesn't do anything but drop interest rates and print money. That's all it does. Every time they create a bubble and the bubble bursts, they're responsible.
And long-term investors create opportunities for day traders. It's true.
Response is, well, we need to create another bubble.
The Fed worked to push interest rates down below the natural rate, and this is where we saw the housing bubble being inflated.
And basically, the Fed created a housing bubble after 2001 with very low interest rates and a lot of moral suasion for people to buy houses and to be invested in housing. And the American people responded.
So what was the role of big banks and Wall Street in all of this?
We had people in...
Sorry. I just, I for some reason I see your name and I think because you got the za at the end, Stefanitza 27. But okay, definitely America.
Wall Street, New York banks, who had never even experienced a Fed interest rate hike, never in their entire career. It had only been going down.
And so that encouraged them to take all of those risks. They were making all of these loans. They were helping blow up the housing bubble.
So they put money in the economy, and the Fed, and everybody looks like, well, the government's rich now, and this sort of thing. And before you knew it, there was a big bubble, and the bubble was supported by people who wanted a house. And
oh, Ron Paul. So I'm ashamed to admit this, but back in the day, I was somewhat of a gold bug libertarian, believe it or not. It was one of the first stories, right? This was kind of early 2000s, mid 2000s. I really got into Ron Paul, watched the Zeitgeist movie. And it was a neat, as Homer Simpson from The Simpsons would say, a neat little package of information about banking in a simplified form, and it was very attractive in that sense. And I was a big fan of this guy. I've since drifted away. I think it wasn't just his libertarian. I didn't understand the implications back then of the totality of the libertarian view, and how I don't think it's socially compatible with the modern age and the technologies we have, right? We do need strong social connections, right? And institutions, as faulty as they can be, provide that. And once I started coming to that realization, I drifted away from my personal feelings about the libertarian movement. And it's an interesting, I think this is a story for everybody. You can ask yourself, going through your life, like, you can't really talk about when you're a child, the world's just sunny days ahead, right? But as you are coming of age, were you a libertarian, or were you more on the socialist side of things? And as I've gotten older, and maybe because, the people around me have grown older, and family and friends, uh, that connection has become more important to me. I know how valuable it is. I know how rare it is. I know how fleeting it can be. And so the idea of a cohesive community where we're not just thinking about our own property, we're thinking about other people's property and other people's emotions. And not to go woke here, because I'm not. I find any extreme, left extreme or right extreme, is not tolerable to me. And I run down the center in a lot of ways. But as I've gotten older, I've become more of a socialist. And I'll just put that out there. That's kind of been my story arc in life. And so I've drifted away from guys like Ron Paul, Grandpa there. He looked like Grandpa back in the mid 2000s, just like that. He looked like your grandpa. I'm surprised he's still alive, but anyways, I digress here.
And get their interest rates low.
Now, what do you do then? If you try to increase the money supply, that pushes prices up. That causes a worse inflation. On the other hand, if you try to tighten money, that
I've tried to have, discussions, with the Austrian community about the natural right. And so their natural right, and this is very important terminology, and this goes back to my article on what is wealth. And of course, wealth is defined differently by all the economic schools. The natural rate is also defined differently between neoclassicals and Austrians, right? So Austrians have a very subjective view on the natural rate. And it's a little more amenable to, it's a pet rock, our position on the natural rate, which is it's zero, because it's not a thing. It's just a construct of neoclassical models. In that sense, they would be amenable by it, but they do say there is this equilibrium rate, some subjective rate out there, and they do become obsessed with the terminology as well.
Causes a recession, and that turns into a full-blown downturn.
This could be the most serious recession in decades. And that means life, as most Americans know it, is about to change, in some cases dramatically.
What happened in 2008 was that some of the big investment banks, the ones that are most closely tied into government, were affected. And those people are the movers and the shakers. They're the ones that contribute to campaigns.
The Fed undertook these policies as an emergency measure to address.
I agree, Stefan Nitsa 27. I agree, and that's what we kind of have right now is mixed economies. It's very pronounced here in Canada, right? We have a lot of social programs in Canada versus the United States, let's say, and it's something that the majority of the population likes. There are strong institutions out there, right? That despite their flaws, provide some sort of social cohesion, and it's not anarchy, right? And obviously the Austrian view and the extreme Austrian view is anarchy. And of course they would argue, well, we don't mean anarchy, just our version of anarchy. So yeah, no, I agree. So I often argue, because I at this point, I make a portion of my money from Modern Macro Technologies, which is an investment firm, which I just finished describing the potential ills of the financial sector. I make another portion of my money from my Patreon, right? So I discuss the ills of the free market, and then I make money from day trading, right? So I am a free market kind of capitalist guy in a lot of ways, whether it's an innovator, whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, as much as I know that's very important for me to have my own self-determination, my own way to express myself, my own way to go make the dollar the way I want to make it. I was brought up by my grandparents, right? So my grandfather lived during World War II. He was about 5 when the German soldiers came into his backyard and stole his older brother's bike. So I was brought up in an environment where you had to work for each of your dollars. Now, you could be working for the government, you could be working for a private corporation, you could be an innovator, right? You could be working for yourself, right? But that was always instilled in me. So I do value that. And that's probably why my life started more on the libertarian side of things. But as my reasonings expanded and those horizons expanded, I realized that in itself has limiting factors, right? And that's why we can have healthy institutions, social institutions, just make our world a little bit better, provide those social structures that allow us to not fight wars with each other, with our neighbors, etc., right? And again, nothing's perfect. Capitalism, its purest form, is not perfect, right? Obviously, communism in its purest form is not perfect. And even some sort of ratio mix between them is not perfect. You know why? Because life is not perfect, right? That age-old struggle between the weak and the strong is still there, right? And we can try to temper it the best we can. But yeah, life is not perfect.
It's what they themselves had all created.
2008 brought a new crisis, and the Federal Reserve started using new tools and programs.
They made it seem like this is a crisis that's affecting all of us.
So now, instead of the Fed targeting a particular federal funds rate or a range of federal funds rates, now the Fed is changing the supply of reserves in the system through open market operations.
And so they came up with all these different ways of injecting new money into the system.
Using partially some tax dollars and some just money printing by the Fed to give all these big banks billions of dollars.
And they started buying, but even more radical.
They've always done. That's the whole point of a central monetary authority, is to fund commercial banks with a means of settlement between each other, right? They've always been growing that with economic activity, and they can restrict that flow or lower that flow and target rates, right? It's quantitative easing is definitely was outside of the realms of norm, but it was just injecting funds into the banking system. We later found out, of course, that didn't spur on any commercial bank loans in the economy. So what they're driving at is fallacious here. We saw a decade of very low growth, very low inflation, very low economic activity.
And that was they started buying mortgages. The Fed bought mortgages in the form of mortgage-backed securities.
They started buying.
Goddamn, for the Austrians, so much they claim we're talking about the real economy. When they get into the crux of their arguments against the Federal Reserve, it becomes a financial argument. It has nothing to do with real resources. God, that's a frustrating part for me. I don't mind going on their level and talking about real resources. In fact, that's great. It could almost be complementary to ecological economics. But when the dollar stops or the buck stops, whatever you want to call it, They go into the financial realm, something which they claim is just, a veil over barter. So it's quite bizarre. And this is what they're doing here. Listen to them, right? They're talking about financial crises, not real resource crises.
Securities as opposed to just government debt. They were intervening in bailing out specific corporations.
So it's not surprising that we saw a big run up. The price went up regardless of the value of the company or the value of the bond or the value of the land.
Listen to this music. Dun, dun. As a European, I'm a strong believer in institutions. Same here as a Canadian. Our values are pretty similar in that regard. Our parliamentary systems, our social systems, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. I agree. Your name, YouTube channel for all. Well, welcome to the channel. Django Geek just rolled in. I know it's been slow and everybody's just starting to roll in now. If you're watching, I'm doing a review on the Mises documentary called Playing with Fire, which I strongly suspect was the answer to MMT's documentary, Finding the Money. I trolled Parabylan about a year and a half ago. I said, you should be the star of the Austrian documentary called Finding the Value, because they're all about value and wealth and subjective wealth, etc., etc. That was my troll on him. Anyway, so that's what we're watching here. We're going through it. So far, if you're just tuning in, it's been the Fed does this, the Fed does that, the Fed is the problem, the Fed is the cancer, etc., etc. And some things I've agreed with, and one of the things that I kind of loosely agreed with them was that financial regulation, which is the domain of the monetary authority, central banks, could be better, right? The Fed could say they are responsible for some of the issues around 2008. But endogenously, if you look at the structure of the system, that was caused by excessive private credit, right? So wasn't the central bank pumping up anything in that regard, right? It wasn't low interest rates. You can have expanding credit and give unworthy credit debtors money. It doesn't matter what interest rate you're at. So I've kind of backed away at that point because I realized, if you're targeting the Federal Reserve, the ill of our society, the only thing you could target is their interest rate. And if you don't have an empirical model to test that out, a structural one like system dynamics, what we have at Modern Macro Tech, you're not going to really be able to test out your theories and see if, okay, is this realistic? If I build a structural economy to the best of my ability, as I understand the economy works, and then I impel these shocks on the economy, does what my mental models say actually work in that structural system? They don't have that.
Value of the land or the value of the real estate.
So that was a change where they were brazen about what they were doing, open about picking the winners. They're receiving the new money first, and they're receiving it at lower interest rates than they would have been.
And the Fed, since that time, has been operating with just one new policy, one surprise policy after another.
The Fed's new policies took it deep into previously untouched areas of the economy. This resulted in an everything bubble of inflation where prices for a wide range of assets and goods and services were constantly increasing.
So there's
You should, Django Geek, you should try to infiltrate the Mises Institute and become a spokesman for him and then tear them apart from the inside.
So there's nothing wrong with prices in general going up or down. It's just that when the government is in control of the money supply, it can use that up and down in prices to benefit certain groups.
In an inflationary environment, your incentives are to consume.
My biggest issue, and this is from YouTube channel for all. I'm glad I'm included. Maybe I'll go to your channel because it's for all, right? Canadians, right? Too. My biggest issue with the lack of taxation of the rich is that they tend to buy up the media and push their ideologies. It biases people's views, which also biases their politics towards selfishness. Interesting. I'm going to have to think about that. I'm going to get into this deep philosophical. So I'm going to think about it while Jonathan Beardo, as I like to call him right here on the screen, talks about his theory.
Are to unload the money as soon as you get it and go buy things. Any amount of money that you've accumulated that's not invested or used to buy consumption goods is going to be losing value in this permanent inflation that we have.
And both the bubble and the problems are really the result of this unprecedented and, in my view, unwise mortgage financing effort of the Fed of making itself into a giant savings and loan.
The way that regular consumers become increasingly indebted, they've got to get those loans from somewhere. And so Wall Street definitely gains as a result of the Fed's money printing.
These bailouts socialize.
There's no statistical correlation between Fed balances and commercial bank money expanding. Also, there is a correlation, obviously, between rates, targeted rates, and commercial bank expansion. But you have to remember, the Austrian postulate is that banks are artificially pushed down. But the reality is, again, when you build a structural model of the economy and a large, complicated one that tries to integrate all the different facets, you realize that the policy rate, without interference from a monetary authority, naturally drops to zero over time, right? That's just the way it is. Now, the one way it wouldn't, and this wouldn't happen, is if there was zero government spending, right? And no interference by the monetary authority. In that case, as economic activity grew, even though it's really would be subjective on my part to say that that's possible without, the 30% of GDP that governments do spend, in that case, rates could rise. But because governments are part of the free market, and this is what I really laugh at Austrian economics and the free market folks. Governments are participating in the capitalist system, right? They've said we live in a capitalist society and we are going to participate in it, right? And yes, we do have exclusive powers over our own currency. That is a phenomenon that we have exclusive rights over, just like commercial banks, unlike any other firm in the private sector, can create a medium of exchange that nobody else could, that would get accepted by everybody, right? But ultimately, they go into the free market and purchase goods and services, bid for contracts. And like I said, they have the power to issue currency, right? So when you build all that into a capitalist system, a lot of S's there, right? And you include that and you model that out structurally and literally press the play button. I'm sure some of you have seen the national model we have at Modern Macro Tech. You'll notice the rate will just drop naturally to zero. That's just the reality of our current capitalist system, right? And so the Austrians say that it's artificially driven down, and the reality is, at least from all the structural modeling that I've done, is actually it's artificially pushed up.
Socialize the losses. So if they create a system with the banks of the profits are mine, the losses are on you, the tax.
And cheeseburgers and McDonald's. You forgot that, Django Geek. Cheeseburgers, McDonald's, steaks and barbecues and hot dogs and baseball and football. You got to add those things too. But you got the big three.
Taxpayer, and that's horribly destructive of the whole free market system.
So each crisis that they cause gives them a chance to grow even more. And with each crisis, the Fed is gaining more and more power. And as they gain more power, they intervene more and create even bigger crises.
As if that wasn't enough, in 2020, the World Health Organization announced a pandemic.
We had a virus go around the world, and
now, if they blame the pandemic on the Federal Reserve, I'm going to lose it.
And much to everybody's surprise, it caused a financial collapse.
Everybody's attention moved completely away from what was going on in the marketplace and in the economy, and everybody was focused solely on the virus and the shutdowns and what was happening to businesses and jobs and the economy.
For a long time during the lockdown, people didn't really spend that money, or they spent it on Amazon and not on brick and mortar shops. And that's forced prices up tremendously.
And so it's quite natural that most
Actually, the supply constraints caused by international lockdowns forced prices up, and firms, of course, marked up. They added a markup, a cost on top of cost, right? A profit markup, and that's there's now 100 papers out there to prove that. And this is again because Austrians don't believe empirics. They reject these papers altogether, and they resort to monetary aggregates, even though they're against aggregates in itself, and say, well, look they printed all that money. That was the cause of inflation, right? Printing that money, and this is something I always argue, it wasn't about yeah, you had to go buy toilet paper, but what it really was about was holding off a financial crisis. Households had debt obligations, right? So the government, by the act of spending, right? Well, if it's deficit spending, they spend, their TGA account goes down, where they're spending in the economy, whoever has a bank, their reserves will go up, and then if you're the recipient of that money, your bank's reserve, the bank you bank with, the reserves go up, and then that bank marks up your account with commercial bank money, right? And so that's what happened. That wasn't even an act of the Fed. That was just governments creating that phenomenon in the system, right? But that wasn't to cause inflationary experiences. And when I model it with the national model, when we look at it and we run that scenario of 2020 to 2022, with or without government stimulus, the difference in inflation, the peak of inflation was like 1.98%, so almost 2%. It was 2% higher with that government spending. The bulk of it was a supply constraint. So what happened is capital utilization went way down in the economy. Factories, stores, everything was shut down, right? All these idle resources, they were there. They just couldn't be used because of lockdown measures, right? And so it was a complete supply issue that caused it, right? Not the government's going in and spending into the private sector, helicopter money, if you will, right? And what that was designed was to stave off a financial crisis, right? So households have to pay the mortgages, right? And that's what it really was designed for, is to maintain financial stability. It wasn't necessarily so people could just go sit and buy from Amazon, which they did, right? That went up because they weren't allowed to go anywhere, right? But that was a creature of the lockdown policies.
Will associate the recession that we went through at that time with the virus rather than with the Fed.
The government's message was that the global economy was collapsing due.
So that's what I was saying too. Like if I ever make a documentary myself, this is the type of music I'm going to aim for. You got to do it. Like when you put a production together, like they'll say this, like I'm part of what's called vidIQ, right? And it's helping me like kind of expand this channel to try to find a direction for it, right? And one of the things you're taught in audio and video is that if your audio's bad, they don't care if you've got 1080p or 4K cameras going, right? And so audio design, sound design is one of the most important aspects of any production, right? And then it comes to your visual and your fancy lights, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm digressing here, but the soundtrack is like, whoa, it's epic, but it's corny epic. I understand.
To COVID, and the Fed responded with its inflationary tools.
We were headed downhill when COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, well, the government decided to spend trillions of dollars to keep the economy going. And the Fed accommodated that by basically printing trillions of dollars.
So the Fed.
Here's the thing. If the central bank won't accommodate it, the federal government will be like, okay, well, we're just going to run a bill through Congress and have a new central bank to accommodate it, right? That's what governments do. That's why we have governments, right? Here's the thing. You have dictatorships, and they will do the same thing. You have all these different types of governance around, and they will all do the same thing. The point of governance, right, is for the collective whole of a nation, right, to make it stronger. And if you have a collective body like a federal government, it is endowed with special powers, such as being able to spend money into existence to propel the economy in a certain direction. This isn't about, what we're spending it on. There's political arguments for that. And in a democracy, you vote people in, you vote people out, depending on, what they want to spend on or not spend on, what they want to tax on or not tax on, right? But this isn't some groundbreaking conspiracy theory that's destroying us within. It's happened for millennia. Even with the metal standards of the past, governments would just shave off a little bit of the coin and stamp a new stamp on and say, this is money now, right? It's always existed that way, that extraordinary power.
The Fed bought everything that wasn't nailed down, and indeed took a hammer and stripped some of those nails away, and it was an all-purpose, all-front bailout.
But when the crisis was over, they didn't stop.
It's like I got Gordon Ramsay here. I don't know who YouTube channel for all is, but relearning economics. TV without video is radio. TV without sound is CTV, which is more interesting. Sound. Like you can't like video, like for a narrative. I'm getting really derailed here. Thanks, YouTube channel. For a narrative to articulate with language, you need sound, right? For art, if I just want to and do my thumbnails and right, then I can use visuals for that. But this doesn't really communicate. There's not a lot of information being communicated here, whereas language communicates a lot of information. And if that's your primary means of communication, it's got to sound good on the mic. So you got to have a nice radio mic. This week on 99.3 The Fox, we have the best rock and roll of the 1990s. Stay tuned. Stuff like that.
Went right on.
And so now they're lending indirectly to specific companies, and it really is a systemization of the too big to fail concept. It's too big to fail permanently. It's a great example of the way that the Fed has ballooned in power.
But the misconception is that the Fed somehow knows the economic future, the financial future, and therefore knows how to manipulate it. Through manipulating interest rates, through manipulating supply of money, through buying, as they have bought, trillions of dollars of bonds and mortgages.
The Fed's buying had far-reaching ramifications for the financial world, but did they consider who else would be affected?
The free market economies are peopled by human beings.
When you see higher prices at the grocery store, when you see higher energy.
Yes, but what are you trying to glean? Are you gleaming? See, you're, like I said, got no problem with art in itself. I can, for instance, when I do complex system modeling, right, and if I want to elicit a response in my brain, I'll plot what I'm modeling, right, the math, right, and look at it and maybe I'll do a 3D plot in relation to time. So time will be on the third axis, and I'm measuring two things against each other, right? And you can make a nice 3D plot, right? And then that in itself gives you information, but it's limited, right? It is limited to a degree, right? And so the age-old argument in like audio video production is it starts with your sound, really. If you don't have sound, it's incredibly frustrating. But then you could think of it like watching a sports game. I find it funny, like I go to the Canucks, the Vancouver Canucks, and so we'll go watch a game, and I almost feel like the game is a little bit naked because I'm so used to the regional announcers we have for them, right? It's a different experience, the atmosphere, the cheering, you get all that. But there is that naked part without the sound. But again, you can get information visually. I'm not so in audio and video, you got video. You need video if you're doing audio and video. But they're saying, that audio is really sets it off, right? It is the heart of things.
energy bills. When you see higher prices anywhere, you should be thinking about how
Not yet.
that
So
loss of your
I
purchasing power
export them
is the
to other
government's gain.
plotting
And so the
programs to
Fed
do it. Like basically, I'll just use Python. So like with Minsky, if anybody cares to know, I just use it as a drafting board, so visual design scape, right? Just like an engineer is using a drafting table. But when I go to apply it to whatever I'm applying, a lot of it times I'll just port it over to Python, right? And then I'll use backend Python, whatever, and then use some front end. It could be like JavaScript, etc., or even like a Python app to create a visualized interface.
Induces people to consume now, live for the present, and not worry about the future.
The step-by-step process by which money spreads throughout the economy and impoverishes the people who get the money late, or those people who are retired and on fixed incomes and never get the new money.
One group that would certainly be harmed would be younger generations.
The people on Main Street didn't get it. They didn't benefit. In fact, they were hurt.
Young people, Gen Z, etc. What they're
As watching this whole video now, top to bottom, the fundamental disagreement I see here is that I would argue that the growth of the financial sector is causing all these ills. And it's irrespective other than proper regulation from the Fed, and that's via financial institutions, right? And proper regulations from the federal government and maybe state governments to a lesser degree. That is the cause of the issue. So the fundamental disagreement here for me and, the position of the Austrians is that regulation can solve these problems. The Austrians are saying the current regulation from the monetary authority is the cause of the problem. And if that's the case, they say, well, let's just remove that and let free markets decide all this. And I don't know your guys' experience with free markets. It's beneficial at one point. I make my income from the free market, but people get left behind as well, right? So that would be very problematic for me. But this is essentially as we're getting closer to the end of this, the conclusion I'm feeling about this so far.
They're facing is not just a Fed that can inflate the money supply out of thin air and evaporate anything that they've...
Now, I'm not too woke to use the real R word, except I'm trying to monetize the channel.
Been able to accumulate.
When the Fed increases the money supply, and especially in the amounts and the ways that it did so during COVID, that it really redistributes wealth. And it redistributes wealth away from the middle class, away from Main Street, towards Wall Street.
Oh, you came in a little bit later, didn't you, Alex? I wonder if that emoji shows up in the display. Oh, it does. We got the angry emoji going. Oh, those dirty regulators. The premise of this documentary, which I think was actually an answer to the MMT documentary that came out about 8 months before it, called Finding the Money, is that the ills of our society are entirely caused by the monetary authority, or the central bank. In this case, they're talking about the Fed. And they're starting to really move the conversation into inequality, right? And so they are placing the blame on the Federal Reserve, whereas my position is it's the growth of the financial sector that's caused, the disparity between the income share for households going down and the income share for financial firms going up. Now, of course, financial firms do pay out dividends, they do pay out wages, but those generally go to more wealthier people whose propensity to consume is lower than poorer people. And of course, that's a whole dynamic system in itself. But that's kind of the crux of all of this, Alex.
And Silicon Valley.
When wealth shifts this much, there was always chaos.
Everything just sort of broke at the end of COVID.
The big picture there is the monetary system facilitates this continued buildup of the combination of corporations, corporatism, and the government.
What this means is that there's one group who will definitely benefit by acquiring all of this wealth, acquiring all of this capital, whereas another group they always have the short end of the stick. So you can definitely see that there are some sectors that are closer to the beginning of this chain of spending. At the very front is the government.
And then the Fed gets rewarded in various ways after that, because the way the Fed finances its own salaries is when it buys bonds, it prints up the money, free money, counterfeit money, buys bonds with it. And so that money goes into the banking system. That's how the money supply increases.
But in terms of like who's first, who's second, who's third, that's not something that we...
So I just noticed I got a complaint on X that the volume of the documentary is a lot louder than the volume of my voice, and I didn't know that. I don't know how much that was bothering you guys. I don't know if anybody else noticed it. Maybe it's an X problem, but I probably suspect that this was pretty loud. It's so hard to judge here because I don't have a reference point. I'm listening through my interface live, so I apologize for that if that's been a problem. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment after the video. That helps as well.
We can pinpoint exactly. But we can definitely say that there is a wealth transfer. There are benefits to being at the beginning, and there are costs to being at the end.
Think of the government together as being both the Treasury and the Fed. One, so as the Fed loses money and just borrows more money to finance its losses, it's just running up the debt, and it's a cost to the taxpayers.
We should definitely be more upset about the institutionalized inflation, the fact that inflation is a permanent feature of our economy.
Using inflation to enrich some while impoverishing others seems to have become the Fed's ultimate weapon.
People feel that inflation, which is a systematic depreciation of the currency. But to put that in context, the Fed actually intends to cheapen the value of your money.
That's why the politicians like it. And also the Fed, they use the Fed as a whipping boy. When things go bad, when the bubble bursts, they call in the chairman of the Fed.
Okay, so you found it was, is it okay now? Because I did turn down these yappers here in the video right there, that video, a little bit, because I'm concerned that it was really, really bad, but maybe it's just him. I've got to really figure, this platform kind of sucks with audio, like, so I don't get any decibel indicators between my voice and any video that I'm playing. Maybe I'll do some research into that and make sure that that issue is never an issue.
Fed, and they lambast the Fed chairman and his associates there and shift the blame to them.
So what it means is that we've got this Leviathan central bank.
Okay.
We've got this bank that has taken on huge powers and is always shifting. One implication of that is that it makes it really difficult to predict what's going to happen, because it means that you have to not only forecast the market, but you have to forecast what the Fed is going to do.
Yeah,
also
that they say that regularly.
And
Did
some
you Ingo
mood
Geek?
board, you know, they'll say, we expect the inflation rate to be thus. We expect growth to be the following. And it's always wrong, because the future is a closed book.
Now it seems like the future of money is ramping up toward a Fed-controlled digital currency. Is a central bank digital currency with its value fixed by the Fed a good thing or a threat?
The Federal Reserve, as it exists today, has a ton of power, and it would just be magnified tenfold, 100-fold with a central bank digital currency.
It poses a large threat to American citizens, because then they can program these things so that they can...
What do you guys think about central bank digital currency? So essentially, my idea of central bank's digital currency is you'd have to have a wallet with the Federal Reserve. So essentially, you'd now just have an account with the Federal Reserve that you'd have digital fiat currency in, right? And it's just a way for you. It's really just a digital alternative to paper bills. I don't know what your guys' thought on it is. I've thought I'm indifferent in some cases. But I also, commercial banks can track us when we spend with our debit cards, and credit card companies can track us when we spend with our credit cards. But because we know that the Federal Reserve is a creature of the federal government, how much tracking do we want from them, right? That would be the one issue I would have. But that's pretty minimal. Because our privacy, let's be frank, in our digital footprints are huge now. So there's a lot of other problematic things. But one thing I would be concerned about is a monetary authority, a central monetary authority supplanting the private sector's commercial banks, right? Where you can shop around for your mortgages, et cetera, et cetera. Do we get to the point where we just have central bank branches all around for central bank digital currency? Because in that case, do you need the digital commercial bank money of commercial banks, right? It's a nuanced issue that some parts I'm indifferent and other parts I could see it could be problematic.
You can neutralize them if you were trying to buy goods that the government doesn't want you to spend money on.
It means that they could have programs in it. You can buy certain things, but not other things.
A digital currency would be so helpful to the Fed, and if they don't like the way you're spending money because they'll see you spend it, that would be the Fed's window into your life.
So if they're...
So I just kind of mentioned that, right? And so there is that aspect that the government has a window in your life, but of course we can nuance that. Well, with our digital footprints now, like we've kind of given that genie's out of the bottle. But that would be one of the concerns that I would have. Just got to fill up my vape here with some new vape juice. I shouldn't do that. Should I do that on the channel while I'm trying to monetize it? Promoting tobacco replica products? Probably not. Hopefully when I get audited for my monetization, they don't look at this video.
If their perspective is that in a crisis we need to stimulate spending, we will tax you a certain amount at the end of this time period if you haven't spent your money. So what I think they're doing is they're priming the pump. They're trying to talk about the pros and the cons of this.
Why Django Geek? Why as long as we can't pay taxes in it? Why would that be an issue?
The central bank digital currency idea, and I think the idea is for them to roll it out during the middle of some crisis in the future, and people will think back and they'll say, oh yeah, this is fine.
It's true, Frank, and so that was an issue up here in Canada. So I don't know if anybody around the world knew about the trucker convoys, and this is a lot relative to the whole pandemic thing, lockdowns and losing personal liberties. But the government froze, the RCMP, our federal police, froze the accounts of some of the protesters, which is incredibly problematic in itself, which means, we already have given up so much control. Maybe central bank digital currencies is not that much of a step further at this point in our society.
The Fed's own digital currency, like Bitcoin without the fun.
With so many ways of manipulating the money supply and the financial sector, the Federal Reserve now has far more power than ever before.
So the Fed has virtually nationalized the financial system.
Who approved that? How did that get made formal?
I should hire you as my lawyer.
They just said it themselves.
That way the whole system is sort of a cartel. The whole system is working together.
It's all kind of like the scene at the end of the movie The Wizard of Oz, where the great wizard is finally there and everybody's in awe, and then all of a sudden the curtain is pulled back by the dog, and you see the phoniness of the whole thing.
So the real question is the Fed really the fireman or the arsonist?
They come in and say, well, we'll cut interest rates. We'll bail out the banks. We'll, bail out the stock market. We'll bail out foreign.
Just reading the comments under this video on Twitter, there is a chat section there. Somebody generally uses a few people use it there. I can't remember who it was looking through the long list of chats, but anyways, you can just chat from there. So if you can comment underneath the video like you can do that here, but you can also use their chat feature and it'll show up here to me directly so I can comment on it.
We'll do all of this when in effect they're the arsonists that started the fire to begin with.
It sets the fire by
starting
off printing new money.
Pet Rock always uses
the
it.
Economy to drive prices up. Then when it sees prices rising, the Fed itself jumps in and claims that it's trying to balance unemployment and inflation, when in fact it's really not the fireman that's protecting them from the flames of inflation.
And so for hundreds and hundreds of years, people have understood the danger of government control of money.
But is this in referring to central bank digital currencies? Because that's just fiat money in digital form. Or are you referring to something else?
Money. So it makes it uncertain even for an individual whenever the government creates price inflation and does that to our money.
What has happened, the leaders in this country, the people who control the
Ron Paul
financial system and the financial system and the whole works, they work on a basis of immorality.
But it is the arsonist, and it continues to be the arsonist. In the
Alex, we call that, what do they call it? Forward guidance. Fed gives forward guidance, which can spook the market or quell the market. And so in that case, sure, I'll agree. That's actually a fancy way to put it.
of a fireman. It's a crazed fireman.
The financial world under the Fed seems to have evolved into madness. Is it time for a new approach?
So we live in very, very dangerous times, mainly because we've allowed the Fed to control the world monetary system. And just because...
I think the biggest thing in your statement is, why do they think gold is good? What is the property they truly see, right? So if they say gold is stabilizing, let's just chalk up their argument to that, right? We'd have to really then, okay, why, Mr. Austrian, is gold stabilizing? Is it because it's rare? Okay, and that's one argument. But if it's rare and economic activity is not rare, doesn't that cause an imbalance between the two, and the medium of exchange isn't efficient to fund that economic activity? Is it because it can be used in other productive processes like, circuitry and stuff like that? So they use gold, it's really conductive, right? And if that's the case, great, then it's a commodity and it should be used as a commodity. Is it because humans find it to be shiny and interesting? And so in that case, it's held that interest for many thousands of years. That then goes back to the fact, what does that relate to economic activity and a means of exchange, right? So there's deeper arguments than just saying, printer go burr and gold is good. Yeah, that's essentially their argument. Then I'd want to know, okay, well, why is gold so stabilizing? What's your opinion on that? And they, of course, don't use empirics. But I'm sure they have a logical human action argument for it that, is logically sound.
Monetary system. And just because you have debt and printed money, that does not mean real wealth.
And while they're guessing, they create.
That's what I was saying. Like back in the mid 2000s, I don't know if you were here earlier, Django Geek, but I was going through the lineage of my life, the story arc, and I was a lot more libertarian, in my early days. And I've gotten older, I've become a lot more socialist in a lot of ways, right? I believe in social programs, and that's probably a reason, just as you get older, you become aware that your relationships and life itself is very fleeting and very rare, right? And so you start to appreciate community. But I was saying, Ron Paul looks the same as he does now as he did back in 2005, an old grandpa that you want to just go give a big hug to. But once you grow up, you realize he's probably Uncle Bad Touch, and you don't want to touch him anymore. And I don't mean that in the way you might think. I mean like he's just Uncle Bad Touch in relation to monetary policy in the Fed.
Great inflations and booms and busts.
Inflation, booms and busts. The results of excessive
Ludwig
government
von
unification
Mises.
cycles of instability were identified by an influential economist in 1912.
So the boom-bust cycle, a term that we use to refer to Austrian business cycle theory, and it was developed by Ludwig von Mises in his book, The Theory of Money and Credit.
But Mises was one of the first economists to fully explain that when money is introduced into the economy, prices don't all go up at once. And people's incomes don't go all up at once.
So if you have an entity working behind the scenes, manipulating the value of that monetary unit, then that's naturally going to cause some kind of trouble.
Basically, what it says is that in a unhampered market economy, this works fantastically. So people decide to save, and people decide to consume, and the balance of that interaction gives us a market interest rate, and it gives entrepreneurs good information on.
Okay, just look at that beard. If I can give anything to Jonathan Newman, it's that beard. And I notice a lot of Austrians have beards. Unless you're one of the outsider Austrians like Parabailen, he's not a real Austrian. He has a job at a government institution, a state-funded university, the University of Oklahoma, but he's a libertarian and believes in free markets and no government intervention or government funding. Wink, wink. But if you're one of the real Austrians, you have beards like Jonathan there that you have to comb every day when you wake up, and food gets stuck in. But it's epic.
On what lines of production to pursue.
Austrian business cycle theory doesn't predict the timing. Some people say that's a flaw, but it's not really a flaw because people have free will and they can spend their money or not spend their money as they see fit.
Austrian economists following Mises have always placed a very high priority on money because it's the one thing we all have in common. We all use money, and he realized that central banks, in manipulating money and manipulating credit, induced this artificial boom, and the consequence of that.
And he said it without any empirics. He thought it, therefore it must be.
Is the economic bust, or what we call now the recession.
Murray Rothbard expanded on Mises's Austrian school.
All he needs is one of those cigars. That's what he should. That's what I picture too. All those Austrians with their beards. I picture them at the Mises Institute in a back room, and it's all like wood paneling with all their old shitty books that they have on Austrian economics. They're all like puffing cigars, playing a game of poker, laughing, drinking whiskey, and actually, it kind of sounds a little bit nice to me. But that aside, right? That's how I picture. These guys. Look at this now. Rothbrand is actually criticized. That's Rothbrand on the screen, and he's often criticized by a lot of hardened Austrians out there. And maybe it's because he doesn't have a beard, right? Where Mises always had at least the mustache going, so he had some of the facial hair going. So that might be an incredible indicator of Austrian intelligence, human action at works, praxeology, is facial hair growth. And maybe, I know they won't do a statistical study on it because they don't believe in empirics, but maybe a post-Keynesian could do a statistical study on the beard growth of Austrian economists to notice if there are any correlation, and if there are correlations, what are the causal effects of that?
Economics. In his works, he advanced the idea of limiting government intervention and abolishing fractional reserve banking.
The importance that Austrian economics brings to the general economic table is that we think money is very, very important, and the natural stability of the monetary unit is very important for everyone in society.
Murray Rothbard, who was one of the co-founders, really, of the Mises Institute here, once said that, if government got in the business of
so also there's the divide between the Hayekians, so the Hayek followers and the Mises followers, right? There's a bit of a freshwater saltwater divide there, and so I guess Rothbrand was more of the Mises side of things. I don't know if there's any Austrians out there. Alex, I think you're a bit of the Austrian leaning type guy, aren't you? Maybe you could tell me.
People would be saying, well, who would make shoes? The government has always made shoes. And the same thing goes for the Fed. A lot of people think, well, yeah, the Fed has always been in control of the money supply, but it hasn't.
Rothbard, even more, pointed out that an increase in the money supply does not benefit society. It benefits some at the expense of others.
Whenever you're in control of the printing press, whenever you're in control of how much money there is, you're going to create winners and losers.
There is no social benefit from increasing the money supply. Any money supply is sufficient to allow people to trade for all the goods and services they want to. But just...
That's ridiculous, right? Of course, everything, if your economy is growing, the components of the economy should grow along with it. How fucking stupid are these guys?
At a lower price.
Will government leaders ever do what it takes to stop the inflation?
Inflation is what you see on an everyday basis when you go to the supermarket, when you stop at the gas station. It's all around you.
The real evil tax is the inflation tax because it hits the middle class and the poor.
When I look out,
they don't have one goddamn paper to prove that, you know, monetary expansion along with monetary growth is the cause of inflation. However, there are thousands of papers starting back with Kalecki on cost plus markups, right? And now, of course, Isabella Weber has kind of taken up that cause, right? And there's tons of papers from many different authors proving that fact about inflation or CPI growth, right?
there I see a lot of government debt, a lot of private debt, and a lot of things working against the free market economy, working against free trade, an inability and almost an unwillingness on the part of
even he has a beard
in the system to seek out peaceful.
So his beard, so this is a little lesser known Austrian, and you can tell that they're lesser known because their facial hair hasn't grown in as much.
Cooperative solutions to emerging problems, and rather to use those emerging problems to their own political benefit.
What should we do with the Fed, the country's political central bank?
We went for a long time without a central bank. And, you know, think about it. Let's put all the
Yeah, and every time you didn't have a central bank, like between the second U.S. Central Bank and the Federal Reserve, you had a banking crisis every 4 years. You had deflation one year of 10% and inflation the next year of 10%, right? So, and ridiculous to think that the banking sector can function on its own. If you are saying that money is so important, that is the medium of exchange that everybody is connected to, then you would think you would want some sort of sound money. And there are sound money activists out there that are not from the Austrian persuasion that have solutions to this problem. And then there's the Austrian solution is, well, whatever we got now for sound money just sucks. So let's just go back to the Wild West and have, 31 different currencies issued by different commercial banks. And we'll say, well, we'll back it up with gold, but we already went through that. You and yourself in this documentary, for people that weren't here at the very beginning, they said that those banking crises were caused by fractional reserve banking. They were only holding a portion of gold, and then they expanded their medium of exchange. But it was quite obvious the true issue in the banking crisis is every bank had a different note that they were issuing. It was very problematic to go from region to region and trade those notes and find what is the exchange value, right? And then if one bank collapsed and their notes collapsed, that would ripple through the system. And it happened every 4 to 7 years without a central bank monetary authority, right? So they're not providing solutions here. They're just saying, and the Fed, what are you going to put in place? Like, are the gold authority, the central bank of gold? Like, is that the solution? They haven't provided that yet in this documentary.
money in the hands of politicians in a secret organization that is never allowed to be audited.
The government's a mess. The Fed's a mess.
We should get back to a system in which money.
Beardo Jonathan. That's what I'm going to call him from now on social media when I interact with him on X. Hey, Beardo. No, I won't do it. That's mean. That's mean. Jonathan Newman's probably a really nice family guy. I shouldn't say that, but his beard is weird.
It's a political game. That's why whenever a congressperson like Ron Paul would argue for auditing the Fed, the entire banking industry would rally around and send millions to both political parties in Washington to kill it, to kill the bill, to audit the Fed.
No, we don't need a Fed.
And what that would mean.
The Fed actually is one of the biggest releasers of economic data on the planet. Just to put it out there, go look at the Fred database.
We would get the money supply
Jesus Christ.
The market can bear and the market would produce.
If you mess around with interest rates, people do dumb things. They buy too much stuff or build too many buildings or cars, and that's the creation of the bubble. And that always has to be corrected.
A life without a Fed.
Look at an Austrian libertarian saying people need to be corrected and it has to be our way.
Is constant growth and slowly falling prices which benefits the entire population, including people on fixed incomes, who are really hurt by inflation. Take away the power of the Fed to ever buy anything again, because that's how they print new money, by buying assets in the market.
We can end the Fed's power and activities today. We can take them completely out of interest rate setting policies. We can take them completely out of the money creation.
So who would set the rates? So these guys are saying, well, we'd have responsible rates if the Fed wasn't involved. So you're saying free commercial banking. And what would commercial banks really do ultimately, right? Is they would have these variable rates. So they jack them down, suck you into predatory lending, and then put you in a variable rate where they could jack it up afterwards. I can't see a realistic world where that would be good for a society. It's just a load of horse shit these guys are spewing at this point. This is the solution part of the video, by the way.
Process.
There's like a minute and a half left.
You, Fed, you're not the decision maker here. You shall not drown mankind in a flood of paper money.
This guy doesn't have a beard. This guy doesn't have a beard. These guys aren't the ones you want to listen to. You want to listen to Jonathan Newman. He has the biggest beard.
Mises were here today, but I think he would be full on in support of ending the Fed altogether.
Fight! Fight for your rights!
The Fed ended, and with it ended the pure paper dollar.
Oh, okay. And the other thing is, so a bow tie qualifies you as an Austrian economist. I see that on quite a few. If you look at, I do watch, the material on the Mises Institute, and those bow ties, they're big.
Would be left to all of us politically and individually to evolve a new system.
What kind of money would the people like imposed on them? Well, how about sound money?
Don't worry, Django, it's almost over.
In terms of monies, gold, silver, foreign currencies, that they voluntarily agree upon.
So you can view this as very closely intertwined with the freedom and independence and responsibility of the citizens having a sound money on one side versus a perpetually inflating currency which favors the ever expanding.
Pet Rocky, because even he thought it was cringy to be a part of it, and he was like, so Jonathan Newman, he is basically Bob Murphy's understudy, right? So he was like, well, you can go do this one, kid, go get him.
Power and spending by deficit, financed by inflation of the government. So this is really a profoundly important political and constitutional question.
I think these are steps back to the gold standard or a commodity money standard.
The gold standard was a constraint. It was the marker of the government's commitment, expressed or implicit, to honor the integrity of the currency. Now, I say integrity is a moralistic word, but money is work, and work is heartbeats. And heartbeats are finite.
You have to take a life-risking surgery to get your cancer out of your belly, and that's the only thing that we can do. Economically, you just get rid of the Fed if you want to have sound money and a healthy economy. That doesn't sound so bad.
My God, that turd thing is over. What a disaster that was. How you guys doing in chat? Yeah, actually, so YouTube channel for all, I actually reacted to that reaction video. It was like the second reaction or first reaction and video I did. If you look in on my YouTube homepage and in the playlist for reaction videos, you'll see I reacted to Bob Murphy and Jonathan Newman take on the Tucker Carlson and Richard Warner interview. And I don't agree with everything with Richard Warner. I do with endogenous money theory, not so much central bank theory. But yeah, no, that's I wanted to react to that because I just thought it was thank God it's over. So what did you guys think? You saw the whole thing. Let's face it, none of you guys would have watched that in its entirety without me pushing it towards you. So what did you think? Did it have any compelling arguments in there about the Fed and the Fed being the ill of society. Was there anything, even one thing, where you can think, you know what, they might be on to something there, or there might be a component that ties into a broader issue? Or was it all just BS to you, right? Be interested. Make sure you put that in the comments too. That way, if any Austrians see this video afterwards, they can just read those comments about how their theory is bullshit. There's some things I like about Austrian economics. And one of the things is the thoughtful debate that they can have. Now, they're part of their own echo chamber, but I've had some thoughtful debates with Austrians, right? Where they interact respectfully. Some of my most respectful interactions and debates on X, formerly known as Twitter, have been with Austrians, even though I have directly opposing views to them, right? So I'm not saying I like Bob Murphy, and I have done live streams together. And I like Bob Murphy, right? If there's an Austrian out there, I like I like him, you know. What did I do wrong, Frank? It didn't make us smarter. I'll tell you that. The production was great, though. Ty, you need to step up your game. Well, you want a game step up. We need some epic music. We need to end the Fed. The Fed is bad. It's destroying our lives, causing inequality. Money should be gold. It should always be gold. Gold is good. The printer go burr bad. How's that for production value? I soundscaped it. Oh, shit. Yeah, I honestly, so I skimmed through it, some time ago when it first came out. And like I said at the beginning of the live stream, I'm not really the zeitgeist conspiracy type guy anymore, right? I'm not really interested in clickbait. So it just didn't interest me. But I had thought about it last week. I'm like, wow, what can I do for a review? I'm like, oh, there was that. And so this is the way I can tolerate sitting through it if I do it with other people that have to tolerate sitting through it. So you guys were part of that adventure with me. And I thank you. I thank you all. For coming on that journey of fuckery with me. The one guy who said the Fed buys securities to print money was kind of correct. Yeah, I remember that part. And that was towards the end, the last 10 minutes or so. And yeah, that's, I just literally put out a blog. You can find it on my Patreon, patreon.com/relearningeconomics, on that very fact. Like literally, I was explaining, open market operations and how that all works and why it happens, and how you can look at treasuries as a form of money, and they come out first, and then the Fed makes sure there's ample reserves so there can be a liability swap on their balance sheet, or on asset swap, of the commercial bank balance sheets, et cetera, and I did all that. It's out. It's free now. It's out if you're on X, you can find it on there too. Pet Rock, who is on X. I like watching this sort of stuff. Better to understand their thinking than be unaware. And you know what? I completely agree. And this is what I was telling Tony earlier, right? Is, it's okay to dive. Do you have an output volume meter? Then you could closely match the video and your voice. Okay, so I'll answer Pet Rock, and then I'll answer YouTube channel for all. Yeah. So no, I agree, and that's what I was telling Tony. I think it's important to keep the back doors of communication open, and that's why I have relationships with Bob Murphy and whatnot, right? I think it's important, especially with Austrian economics. We all have to remember that they're heterodox too, right? They're not mainstream by any means, right? They're small fish, and it's also a reminder too that if you are on the side of, let's say, MMT, you're small fish too. in the world of conventional economics, you're the laughing stock, along with, to a degree, Austrian economics. You're the laughing stock, right? You might feel like big and it's growing. It has grown like the MMT movement, but it's small potatoes in the big scheme of things, and it's still a laughing stock aspect. Now, there's even post Keynesians. It's small potatoes, right? It's a component of teaching in conventional economics, but small potatoes. Keynesianism, so like new Keynesianism, is mainstream economics, right? So you'll see Keynesianism in that form, right, which is just neoclassical economics dressed up with some frictions and DSG models. That's all that is. Do you have... Okay, so this is what I was asking earlier. I'm assuming you watched. Not in... So when I look at this and I go to my audio setting, I have a audio bar for my input on my mic. So I can see, you know, the decibel levels of my mic. And it's good. I keep it right now. I'm looking at it. It's not redlining, but I'm getting it close to the yellow, right where I want it. But I don't think I have one for the video. Like, I can control the volume. Let me just test it out here. And let's see if I can see it.
The Fed has made the economy more unstable than it was before the Fed.
No.
They, the keeper of the keys of the...
No, so I cannot see that. So that's the tough part. I will make sure in the future just to turn it down a little more, because I did get a complaint on X that the video was too loud. And I feel like my mic's close enough. It's hard with live streams. Like, it's incredibly hard. Like, you can post editing, right? As long as you've got your audio in separate channels, right? You can post edit the hell out of anything and make it good. But live streaming, it's incredibly hard, right? And I can't, like, even monitoring, like, I can't monitor like through my streaming platform because there's this lag, and even in OBS Studio, which is audio video software, there's that lag. What do they call it? A latency. So between you actually speaking it going through the digital software, the cables, and then coming back into your ear, right? You can solve it, but it's very complicated, right? So I can't even monitor my voice level. So what I'll do before the stream is I'll do a test of my voice, record it, look at my decibel reading, see it's coming out. Yes, yeah, that's the one. I replied to it. Dude, the volume of the video you're reacting to is low compared to your voice. Okay, so it was saying the video was too low. I see. Okay, I'll have to listen to it after and see. I don't want it to be too loud because sometimes I like to yap over the video. So I'll check it out and I'll make the adjustment. Well, let's test here, guys. Let's just test. We're doing the live stream here anyways. Let's test. I'll play the video. And so compared to the video right now and me talking at the same time, do you feel like it's balanced? Right? And if I pause the video, do you feel like I'm too loud right now? And if that's the case, I'm gonna turn it up, and then you tell me, because this will give me an indication, because all YouTube videos when you upload a video, we're looking at there's a standard, YouTube, and it won't let you go above. It'll clip you out. So most videos are all the same, like a recorded video. So let's see if I turn up the video.
The magic kingdom of money.
Now, in relation to it,
they would like to be.
Is it a little bit closer now?
Solver.
Does my voice match the video voice? And now I'll turn off the video. And now, how does it sound now? I just turned it up a whole bunch, the video. because I'm trying to, if I can do this test now with you guys live, then I can actually kind of suss this out for the future. It was good before you turned it up. So everybody, and here's another thing with the human ear, everybody hears things different. Like I can put all different like equalization on this mic and I can get that radio voice. So it's like you're listening to a radio podcast and everything is just smooth and you can hear all the nuance of my voice. Just like this, just talking real quiet, just right to you, right, and whispering right in your ear like a creep, right? Like, so everybody's ear reacts slightly differently. And I'll play it here.
They're really the arsonist that started the fire to begin with.
And then I stop it. So it might be a little bit too loud. So the dial on the interface, if I put it in the medium, I'll listen to this later too. So now it's at the medium level. And it had so much music in this video that
For over
that
a century, the
in itself,
United States financial leadership, guided by
is really hard to suss. So now I've turned it down a little bit. So I'm halfway in between where I was during the live and where I jacked it up there. I'll listen to it and I'll experiment with it later, but doesn't matter for that video. It's done. It's over now, guys. It's been almost 2 hours. We're at 2 hours. Getting pasty mouse. I've been a sound engineer for okay. I've been a sound engineer for all the majors for 20 plus years, trust me. Compare to their dialogue, not to the music. Okay, so yeah, and I would agree. So I'll watch the video. I'll watch it on my big screen, right? That video was pretty music intensive. Like there was background music the whole time. I'll have to watch and see how I feel, right? Now there are close. The video can be a little softer. Let's try it again. Let's fast forward it.
Was only to prevent mass bank failures.
And the goal was to stabilize the banking system, stabilize.
There, it's a little bit softer now. So this is my normal talking voice, etc., etc. Maybe that matches a little bit better, but I'll stop screwing around with that. Thanks for the input, guys. You guys are all like my engineers of the live stream. I think Yoro Joro is also into music and stuff. The music in the video was louder than the voices, so some of the problem was the video itself. Yeah, like I found, like I've tried making like pre-recorded YouTube videos. I have one that's it's on my Patreon. I think anybody, even if you're not paid, can go watch it. And I always, adding background music is really fun, but it shouldn't be the story itself. It should nuance in the background. And I found it was a little overpowering, like they were trying to overproduce something there. And that might even say something about what they were talking about. Maybe it was garbage after all, and they just tried to pump it up with really good background music. Who knows? Anyways, this has been fun. It wasn't our most lively live stream. We had people show up. It took about an hour for everybody to start rolling in, but we got through it. We're going to be back this Friday with Prof. Steve Keen's not going to be there, but I'm going to have Mike Radzicki and Dave Folks with me. We're going to talk about tax policy. So the different types of taxes we have, like wealth taxes, consumption taxes, income taxes, and what are their effects. And I think I'll pull out the national model and model it. Right, just show it, like what happens in real time. So we'll be doing that. Make sure you are hitting the like button, subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I looked at my notification bell stats. Only 5% of my subscribers are using it, and of those 5%, only 2% actually have the settings on their mobile device to send the notification. Right, so even if you're hitting that notification bell, you may not get it in the end. So make sure you do that. that, leave comments after the video, or in the comments after the video. Helps with the algorithm to try to push this video out. Our stream on Friday is almost at 1,000 views now, so that's been my highest live stream post watches after the live stream. And during the live stream, it was like 50 consistent people watching through the whole live stream. So some of these streams are really starting to pick up. I like the way things are going, right? And I always try to update you guys in my community post tab thing there, where I can post little, upgrades of the channel, any of my new blogs I put out. So always check it out. But yeah, it was fun. Real fun. What do I got to turn off here? Let's turn off the chat. Love you guys. Let's turn off all this crap. All right? Let's just turn it all off. Shut off the lights. Right? Let's turn it all off. It's just me in the background talking in my radio mic. I'm just kidding, guys. But anyways, I'll see you. I'll see you in a couple days.
You are now relearning economics.